gene drives are probably one of the most powerful technologies we've seen. They involve the ability, just by changing the genetic code of one organism, to impact entire species or entire ecosystems. And as such, the impact that the sort of leverage they can have over biodiversity, over food systems, over people's life, is massively multiplied. So it's a really key example of a technology that needs to be governed. In some ways, it may actually be an ungovernable technology. And the speed with which this technology has emerged, with support from militaries, from billionaires, from major players in the biotech industry, is extremely alarming. So this is a technology that should not be getting out of the bottle, shouldn't be getting out into nature, and it certainly shouldn't be transforming our ecosystems and our food systems. Because this technology of not just gene drives, but the ability to apply these new synthetic biology techniques, whether it's gene editing or other techniques, are so powerful that they offer this amazing amount of leverage over the natural world. And if you have leverage over the natural world, then you have leverage over food systems, you have leverage over people's livelihoods, you have leverage, really geopolitical leverage. The fact that this is now possible to transform entire species, entire ecosystems to do that, or it could be possible, means that the military has to be there. The US military has to have control of this technology. They have to be on the front end of it, and it becomes part of the geopolitical game, just as nuclear power is a geopolitical chip. So they have to be there. For billionaires, the likes of Gates, for example, I think there's a real interest if you had a technology this powerful that could be deployed as the solution to whether it's climate change or a food crisis or a health crisis. Those billionaires also want to be there to reap the benefits. They want to be the ones who ultimately either have the patents or at least have the investments such that they can provide this as a quick solution, the techno-fix solution to the many crises that we're seeing in this century. And someone like Bill Gates sees gene drives could be this sort of easy, quick techno-fix that could be privatized, controlled, and short-circuit the real solutions, which are about building food sovereignty, agroecological systems, really giving back control over biodiversity to indigenous communities. Those things are complex and they don't really help billionaires, whereas a high leverage technology that you could drop in and reap the benefits is very attractive. What's interesting is that if you go back even just 5 years, the idea that you're going to genetically engineer wild ecosystems, or have something that intentionally spreads in the environment would have shocked many people, and would have shocked many policymakers, and appropriately so. But now there's been this very deliberate attempt to change the script, to change the narrative, to say maybe we do need to re-engineer nature. Maybe we do need to become kind of like gods, artificially changing nature in order to deal with whether it's the loss of species or climate change or coming food crises. And that turn to assuming the technological ability to re-engineer our biosphere has tremendous hubris. It's about handing tremendous power to a very small group, a technocratic elite, and we can't just let that slide into being the case. That I think if you talk to many people around the world, it would go against their deepest ethics to turn nature, that which they are part of, into something that can be controlled and manipulated to this level. So it needs to be discussed. At Sedgwick Group, we're involved in bringing the topic of synthetic biology, which is the bigger platform that gene drives exist in, to the Convention on Biological Diversity, because we knew that these powerful technologies would impact biodiversity, it would impact people's livelihoods, it would impact the rights of indigenous and other biodiversity-based people. And in a way, by bringing that topic to the convention and having the convention talk about it, it was a way of assessing what are the impacts of these new technologies. But we're now at a time when our technologies don't come one at a time. You know, we're at the same time as we're trying to understand and work out how to govern gene drives, we're trying to work out how to understand and govern geoengineering and genetic engineering, how to deal with artificial intelligence, how to deal with all number of things. And we need to have governance systems that are able to put in place assessment, and that assessment can't come from the billionaires, it can't come from the military, it can't come from narrow experts. It really has to come from the people who are most affected, people on the ground, farmers, pastoralists, indigenous people, fisherfolk, and so forth. So there has been an increasing push from civil society, from indigenous peoples and others to put technology assessment of these new synthetic biology techniques into the governance of biotech. But it's got to be wider than biotech, frankly. The Convention on Biological Diversity is recognizing that if governments can't have a process of assessing new technologies, of being able to see forward and consider the impacts and then put in place means to control them and mitigate against their effects, then we're going to be in for one after another sort of tsunami of effects just slamming us and biodiversity again and again and again. So it's actually pretty urgent that we can't just silo these into one or another technology. We have to have the capacity as a society to intelligently reflect before the technologies hit us. It's been fascinating to watch the topic of gene drives appear out of nowhere and become a sort of policy object and a fight at the Convention on Biological Diversity and in other spaces. The first working gene drive using CRISPR was towards the end of 2014, but within a couple of months, we already saw a major investigation by US National Engineering Academy, sponsored by DARPA, the US military, and by the Gates Foundation, which attempted to frame policy in a positive way on this extremely new technology. And from that point onwards, we've seen almost as much money, in fact, probably much more money, going into trying to frame the policy environment for gene drives to make it acceptable to move ahead with this technology, as into the technology itself. That there is sort of tremendous investment and activity on trying to make this really very problematic technology palatable, to try and build argumentation that it's somehow going to, deal with conservation issues, or that it's going to deal with, the problems of malaria. And honestly, this is what we're seeing with many powerful technologies, but the speed at which this has happened with gene drives really shows how important it is to those who want to re-engineer nature and gain control of our environment through technological means. They can't have a repeat of the sort of opposition and reasonable concern that came up around genetic engineering, for example. And they're trying at all costs to control the narrative. The proponents of gene drives, and they really are a very particular gang at this point, who are putting all of their funds and time into trying to push forward the technology, would like to talk about specific use cases. They'd like to talk about malaria. They'd like to talk about very narrow theoretical ideas of saving invasive species, specific ones. But what we've noticed again and again is when you pull out from the very specific use case and you look at the bigger picture, their arguments fall apart. Whether that's on health, in the case of malaria, this isn't something that requires a technical fix. This is about social healthcare systems and so forth, and how they've been chronically badly treated. You don't fix that technically, and certainly around conservation. That ultimately the conversation we need to have is about how we relate to the web of life. Do we want to try and inflict little technical fixes here and there while the web of life is torn apart by other forces, whether those are commercial forces, military forces, or is this a moment where we say, no, enough, we've intervened enough. We've intervened enough in the social and cultural systems that keep our societies together, and into the web of life and biodiversity, into our food systems, and we're not going to let that go a further step of genetically engineering the whole thing for profit.